While there's a lot to be said for the benefits of practical effects in movies, where filmmakers know precisely what they've captured on the day and actors have something to work with on set, doing things for real also has its share of limitations. And so there have absolutely been movies over the years which overzealously relied upon tangible props which ultimately didn't cut the mustard with audiences. As such, it's tough not to feel that each of these scenes would have instead been better served by VFX. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 movie scenes that should have used CGI. Number 10, the animatronic bear, the Wolverine. An early scene in 2013's The Wolverine sees Logan come across a dying grizzly bear in the woods, and put it out of its misery with his sharp claws. Though the brief glimpse of the bear earlier in the film was achieved digitally, for this sequence the production opted to use a 12-foot animatronic. And while it's great that Hugh Jackman had something tangible to work opposite, the rather dated-looking prop doesn't really hold up in a film so awash with digital effects elsewhere. The bear animatronic genuinely looks like something Hollywood would have used decades ago, with its literally robotic movements failing to convince that we're actually looking at anything close to a real grizzly. Even with the scene smartly taking place at night, which should in theory conceal many of the rougher seams, the frequent lightning flashes make it overwhelmingly obvious that we're looking at a cheap, hokey prop. Given that James Mangold was playing with a $132 million budget here, this scene needed to use CGI, right? Now, this may not have been a great X-Men movie moment, but what's been your favourite of all time? You let me know in the comments section down below. Number 9, the underwater mannequins, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. In the fourth Harry Potter film, Harry must undertake 3 tasks as part of the Triwizard Tournament, the second of which sees him rescuing Ron from the Black Lake, all while others must save Hermione and Cho Chang. And though Daniel Radcliffe clearly swam underwater for real for the scene, with digital embellishments made to add character and atmosphere, the likes of Rupert Grint and Emma Watson were evidently switched out for rather cheap-looking mannequins. Though the wide shots don't look too bad, the numerous close-ups of Ron and Hermione's rubber stand-ins show all the flaws, namely a lack of detail in the face and hair. More to the point, when we see the duo getting pulled around underwater, they don't move with the fluidity of human bodies, making it hilariously obvious that we're watching dolls get dragged around a water tank. Digital doubles probably should have been the way to go here, and even though CGI hadn't yet graduated to pitch-perfect replications of human beings by 2005, the scene's murky underwater setting would have probably papered over most of the cracks. Number 8, the ship crash Speed 2 Cruise Control. Speed 2 Cruise Control climaxes with the runaway cruise ship crashing into an island, where it causes enormous damage to the pier and surrounding town. Director Jan de Pont was fiercely determined to shoot the scene for real, rather than using miniatures or CGI, spending a stonking $25 million, a quarter of the movie's entire budget, to build a life-size replica of the ship and have it driven on rails through a purpose-built pier. It sounds awesome in theory, but the reality is that the final scene mostly ends up looking like it was just shot with miniatures anyway. At which point you have to question why de Pont spaffed so much of his budget on doing it at scale. CGI was certainly in an advanced enough state by 1997, this being the same year that Titanic was released, to execute the ship crash effectively. And it probably wouldn't have been as costly or time-consuming as building a huge set and crashing a hydraulic ship into it. Number 7, Old Man DiCaprio, J. Edgar. For the Clint Eastwood-directed biopic of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, star Leonardo DiCaprio was caked in a heavy layer of makeup and prosthetics for the scenes in which he played an older Hoover. DiCaprio spent 6 hours per day in the makeup chair, and yet the film received overwhelming criticism for, above all else, its ridiculous-looking makeup, with critics and audiences alike deeming it a distracting miscalculation which encroached upon DiCaprio's performance. When a buzzy awards-baiting prestige drama misses out on a Best Makeup and Hairstyling Oscar nomination as J. Edgar did, you know they've really whiffed it. And yet the more elegant solution was in plain sight. placing tracking markers on DiCaprio's face and aging him digitally instead. Given that the likes of The Curious Case of Benjamin Button and various Marvel Cinematic Universe movies have shown how effectively CGI can age up an actor, that would have most certainly been the better route, and saved DiCaprio hours per day in the process, and from that slightly comical look too. Number 6, the half-empty stadium, The Dark Knight Rises. The first of 2 Christopher Nolan entries on this list now, because as much as the guy is fastidiously determined to rely on CGI as little as possible, there are absolutely times where it's incredibly worthwhile. Case in point, the unforgettable sequence in The Dark Knight Rises where Bane blows up the Gotham Rogues football stadium would have felt a little more terrifying if the venue wasn't blatantly half empty. Throughout the sequence, it's clear that the production couldn't fill the almost 70,000-seater stadium, Pittsburgh's Heinz Field, with only 15,000 extras being present for filming. As such, almost every wide shot makes it hilariously obvious that the arena is barely populated, no matter that Bane was supposedly attacking a huge Gotham football game. Hell, it was noticeable enough that even the esteemed film critics at ESPN took the opportunity to dunk on it, confirming beyond any doubt that Nolan should have enhanced the crowd with digital replacements. Cheers for watching this video today, folks. Hit that subscribe button down below for more What Culture on your screen. Number 5, the animatronic spiders, Jumanji 1995. Now, to be completely fair to 1995's original Jumanji, the film has its share of poorly aged CGI that didn't even look particularly good at the time, namely those nightmare-fuel-inducing digital monkeys. But director Joe Johnston went purely practical for the memorable sequence where, near the end of the movie, the heroes are attacked by a fleet of giant spiders. Said spiders are very obviously plastic animatronics, looking less like the articulate props you'd expect to see in a major Hollywood production than something that was rigged up at your local haunted house around Halloween. This isn't to say the animatronics don't have a certain kitschy slung-together charm of their own, but the fact that they're clearly being piloted mechanically undercuts how terrifying they should appear to the audience. The limitations of animatronic movement also mean that when the spiders finally scuttle away, Johnston had no choice but to speed up the footage, which ends up looking silly in a bad way. If there was anything in the movie worth devoting some VFX resources to, it was surely this, right? Look at those silly little critters. Number 4, Ezekiel Sims' botched ADR, Madam Web. There are so many things wrong with Madam Web, but perhaps the most egregious thing of all is the bafflingly bad voiceover dubbing for the film's villain Ezekiel Sims, played by the talented Tahar Rahim. In almost every scene in which she appears, it's painfully clear that Rahim re-recorded his lines in post-production for reasons unknown. Sims' spoken dialogue is frequently out of sync with his mouth movements, sounds too clean compared to the environment he's in, and much of the time the filmmakers have conspicuously edited their way around showing his mouth at all. Clearly something went very wrong here, but the fix-it-in-post mentality doesn't have to mean merely trying to dub and edit your way out of a tough spot. In recent years, digital mouth replacement and sync technology has come on leaps and bounds. Enough that even the $3 million thriller Fall used deepfakes to remove profanity from actors' lines, allowing the film to be released with a PG-13 rating. In that movie, the result is near impossible to spot, and if a film made for so little money could pull it off, there's no reason that this $100 million superhero blockbuster couldn't employ similar effects techniques to tidy up the dodgy lip sync. Number 3, the Jaguar Puppet, Apocalypto. Mel Gibson's Apocalypto is a brilliantly visceral period thriller that gets so much right, but comes unstuck during the sequence where protagonist Jaguar Paw sicks a black jaguar on his pursuers, which kills one of their number before they stab it to death. Poor kitty. Obviously, most of the sequence wasn't shot using a real jaguar, though rather than realize the attack through primarily digital means, it was instead a crude combination of occasional CGI and a goofy-looking animatronic puppet. In many shots, it's hilariously obvious that a stiff, scarcely animate Jaguar puppet has been thrown at the actors and is being clumsily manipulated by a stagehand off-screen, when, given the chaotic nature of the sequence, an entirely CGI Jaguar would have probably passed muster quite easily. Sequences like this are tough to pull off on tight budgets, And with Apocalypto being made for a fairly svelte $40 million, it evidently didn't quite stretch to a fully digital animal. Number 2, the Trinity Test, Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan's epic biopic Oppenheimer is centered entirely around the pivotal Trinity nuclear weapon test. And per his career-long commitment to doing things the hard way, he decided to shoot the massive explosion entirely practically, prompting some to joke that he was going to film a real nuclear detonation. You wouldn't put it past him, would you? The film sequence was achieved by creating a smaller practical explosion and using forced perspective tricks to make the fireball appear larger than it actually was. And while it's a dazzling scene, it does also end up feeling a tad underbaked. It ultimately just feels like Nolan zoomed in on a pretty big explosion. But the uncanny eeriness of a real nuclear detonation just isn't really there. Had Nolan used CGI to enhance the scale and ferocity of the Trinity Test, it likely would have had a far more visceral impact upon the average viewer. Though Nolan's deference towards getting as much as possible captured in camera is laudable, in this case it also ended up undermining his work, as a mixture of practical and digital techniques was clearly the right way to go. Number 1, the practical liquor, Resident Evil 2002. The climax to 2002's original Resident Evil film sees Alice and the other remaining heroes face off against the mutated final form of the Licker, which has been pursuing them throughout the movie. The Licker attacks them on a train as they make their escape out of the Umbrella facility known as the Hive, with the creature being realized through an iffy combination of CGI and practical elements. But the end result makes it howlingly clear that director Paul W.S. Anderson should have gone fully digital. The shots of the practical Licker animatronic are extremely stiff, presumably due to its limited mobility, enough that Anderson is evidently forced to choppily cut around it in an attempt to disguise how clunky it actually is. The CGI for the scene isn't great either, but at least it gives the Licker the mobility and menace that the sequence requires. Instead, splitting the difference between CGI and a naff animatronic feels like a misguided half measure and somewhat undermines this licking terror. Fully CGI was the way to go, Paul.